Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are in Charnel Valley playing as the Dwarves against the forces of the Empire. And Charnel Valley is one of those maps that really favors campy artillery play. And I think the only map that really equals it in this regard is Arnhem, which has a very similar design. We've got one area of high ground, one area of low ground, and it's very linear and very easy to sort of pick apart your opponent as they approach. So I decided to take full advantage of that here with my Dowie force, and we've got a huge field battery. For my lord, I decided to run with a Rune Lord. Now he is mounted on a Anvil of Doom for the Locus of Power because it's just so useful. That 15% extra magic resistance can be great at reducing damage from Sterling's Revenge, which is a pretty common sight in this matchup. Empire does tend to bring Witch Hunters, surprisingly. I'm not entirely sure why, but they're kind of common sight in this matchup, so you can completely screw them over and cut down their damage output by 40% total. You can reduce the damage output from Accusation, from Final Transmutation, stuff like that by a huge amount. There's a lot of damage spells people try to use against Dwarves too, and Rune Lord mitigates them all. I also did bring the Rune of Wrath and Ruin, as well as the Rune of Negation. Rune of Negation, of course, for that survivability. Rune of Wrath and Ruin for that crowd control, for that ability to slow down specific targets, especially Cav, and allow my Slayers or Artillery or shooting to deal with them. Finally, the Master Rune of Grungni to provide some additional missile resist, because Empire can go very heavy on shooting and tear Dwarves up. It's one of those things people I don't think realize, but Dwarves, while being a very powerful ranged faction, are not as cheap and cost-effective, I think, as Empire necessarily. For my front line here, we actually didn't bring any heroes. So for my front line, it is a bunch of Longbeards with great weapons. These guys are a decent choice in this matchup. They can do okay damage to they'll deal with any lower end Empire infantry, and their great weapons mean they can dish out some hurt to, say, heavy cav, like Reichsguard or Deminger for Knights or units like that, which if you bring, say, normal Longbeards, they're not going to be able to do that job, and also normal Longbeards will not do very well against greatswords and units like that. Over here, as a bit of a filler, we do have some miners with blasting charges, and then really the main killing power here. We've got 3 units of Thunderers spread out. These guys, of course, will do a lot of damage, and they can also kind of shoot down enemy shooting, whether crossbows or handguns or Sterling's Revenge or anything like that. These guys can take it down. 2 cannons to counter battery enemy artillery, as well as to shoot down cavalry. An organ gun to do basically that same thing, though not necessarily against artillery. And then Dragonback Slayers as well as Giant Slayers. And I find Giant Slayers are actually really good in this matchup because they just tear through heavy cav. You hit them with a Rune of Wrath and Ruin, these guys get on top of them, and those two-handed axes and those angry stunties are going to do work. For my opponent, he decided to go very wide, but with a bit of an interesting build. He's got a little bit of everything. For his front line, he does have Sigmar's Sons, great swords, 2 swordsmen, so trying to get a little bit of extra width there, as well as another unit of great swords. He does also back them with some flagellants for some additional unbreakable force. And then on the ground, he does actually have a decent shooting contingent. Double crossbows, handguns. The crossbows might seem like an odd pick, but against Slayers, for example, they'll do rather well. They're also not terrible against Rangers, so they can definitely sometimes do some work. Personally, not the unit I would recommend because they do cost 500 a pop, but they can definitely do some more work than one would expect against Dwarves. A Witch Hunter, one of those units you see all too often. Halberds, which are a really odd pick. And I'm not entirely sure why he picked them. Maybe for the AP and high melee defense, they can trade okay with Dwarf Infantry in a protracted engagement, but wouldn't be my first call. Reichsguard and Demigra still do okay. Karl Franz here, on foot. He's got all of his buffs. He also does have the Gal Maraz, though no Reikland Runefang, which is what I would try to bring when you're to buff up your infantry. And finally, Great Cannon to shell away at my troops. So definitely a pretty well-rounded build, though there are some interesting choices like the crossbows and the halberds that I wouldn't necessarily recommend. I also do find Demigris are pretty risky. Though I could understand why he decided to try to run them, because they are AP and they've got shields, and they can definitely tear through infantry. I have run them before against Dwarves, and if you're able to avoid heavy artillery play destroying you, they will munch on Dwarf infantry really, really effectively. But regardless, these early maneuvers, I can see where my opponent is coming from, so we're kind of shifting units around. You can see we're actually pushing our organ gun up to the high ground, shifting some of these miners with blasting charges, shifting the Giant Slayers, getting set up for what I expected would be a bit of an artillery duel, which Dwarves tend to win. Dwarf artillery does not do as much damage per shot, and it doesn't have as much range as Empire artillery, but it does shoot a little faster, and it does have better accuracy as far as I'm aware. So, shortly the engagement is going to tee off. You can see the first cannonballs here, a handful hitting the Longbeards here, taking 4 models down, which is not what we want. But our cannon is returning fire. You can see the Great Cannon, they're already down a couple of HP points, and taking some hits. So the Dwarf Cannon here in a bit of a position, in a bit of a good position, because you can see we're hidden behind this little berm, and so we're able to shoot over the berm, and this cannonball is going to struggle to hit. Over there, though, he does bounce and take off a few Giant Slayers as well as a few Minor Blasting Charges, which are some pretty valuable units, and units we don't want to be losing. That said, despite the ricochets doing some damage to the cannon crew here, the Dwarf Cannon is already coming out on top in this engagement. Dwarf Cannons are just better. In the meantime, as the Reichsguard does try to push in, the Organ Gun is teeing off, and you can see those shots lancing in, though unfortunately the berms, which help May defend here, are also helping the Reichsguard stay alive, and you can see a lot of those shots just whiffing, though nonetheless 7 Reichsguard do get taken down before they get in range. You can see another few getting gunned down there, and in come the Giant Slayers, who are going to just tear these guys to shreds. Now certainly my opponent gets on my cannon, which is great for him, but Giant Slayers have 43 weapon strength, AP. They've got a bonus versus large of 30, so their melee attack is up to 80 against large. They're basically hitting with every hit here, and the Reichsguard are just having a horrible time. They get hit by Master of Wrath and Ruin, and they get shut down very hard. And you can see these angry stunties just chasing them, miners chasing them in melee setup, and these guys are just not able to get away. The Reichsguard gets completely shredded, and they're going to be chased off the field because it's so close to the edge here. Now, in the meantime, the Demigryph Knights over here trying to swing in and be a nuisance against the Organ Gun, which is trying to pivot into shots. You can see the Demigryph Knights, they will do some damage. They're definitely going to be able to trade pretty well with the Longbeards if they stuck around, but they decide not to, and my opponent pulls them away to extricate himself. In the meantime, the handgunners here unloading, you can see on my poor Longbeards, but we are engaging with them with the Organ Gun, which should be able to mow through them pretty efficiently. You can see it's taking down quite a few models there. Taking down like 6 models shot there, and that was a single gunfire. Some pretty crazy stuff. Blasting charges over here, flying into the Flagellants, who are basically about as perfect of a target as you can get. They're a little loose in formation, which is unfortunate, but these naked psychos are definitely going to take a beating from those explosives. Nonetheless, miners will not win against Flagellants in a protracted engagement because their melee stats are just so bad. In the meantime, we are trying to pull back our cannon. You can see over here, I'm trying to get this cannon online to fire at Karl Franz, who is trying to flank around here with the halberds. My opponent did pull all of his troops up onto the high ground. This cannon continues to pound away because I've been forced to pull my artillery back. I'm being forced to pull my Longbeards into the fray here to plug up the gaps. And my opponent's mass strategy is definitely working for him. That said, the Organ Gun here really needed to be firing at the crossbows, and instead it is firing at the Demigryphs. So my opponent is going to be able to get his crossbows in range and start wailing on me. That said, as the Demigryphs do pile in, you can see they've already lost several models. They're down 5 models already. They're trying to push through, but the Giant Slayers are there to intercept, and they just catch them. And once again, the Demigryphs are going to be taken to Pound Town. You can see they're getting torn to shreds. My opponent was, I think, underestimated the power of Giant Slayers here. I definitely think he overestimated the power of the armor on the Demigryphs and how far they'd be able to get. And you can see they just get mulched in tremendous fashion in the space of a few seconds. That said, crossbows are starting to wail on Organ Guns. Now, fortunately, Organ Gun crews do have a little bit of armor. They're Dwarf crews, they're Dwarf crews, so they've got some armor, and they're a little tanky, but you can see I'm investing most of my fire into these handguns because I'm less worried about the crossbowmen, but because of that, the Organ Gun is just getting pounded down, which is really unfortunate. Over here, in the meantime, Karl, with Stand Your Ground, as well as his own damage output and the buffs, is actually tearing through these Longbeards pretty effectively. He is on foot, so he's not able to, it's not really possible to shoot him very effectively, and he's definitely able to just stomp these poor Longbeards. In the meantime, the Longbeards over here bunkering down, holding out against the Swordmen. Here in the pits, we got Master Runes of Wrath and Ruin destroying the Greatswords. And although these crossbowmen over here were pounding away at my Giant Slayers, which is a great move, definitely some great value there, these Giant Slayers are not going to be able to flank and get into the back line. Meantime, the Witch Hunter over here trying his best to use accusations and pick away at my troops, but the simple fact is this guy's doing almost nothing. We look at his damage up, he's doing magic damage. So against the Rune Lord here, who's got his missile resist, as well as magic resist to 55%. This guy's literally doing 10% of his damage. He's literally at the minimum chance to damage. Crossbows over here do get caught out by Slayers, which is not where they want to be in life, and they're going to get shredded. The cannon's still firing away. It is now up to 55 kills. It's basically pegging away into this clump and doing a lot of hurt. Over here, the Giant Slayers are going to get against the Flagellants, which is a horrible engagement. If there's one fight in the Empire matchup you really don't want getting as Giant Slayers, it's honestly this one against the Flagellants, because they have no armor, so you get almost no benefit against them. And they got all the benefit against you. That said, as my opponent's Sigmar Sons do break through, certainly they're unbreakable, so they'll keep pushing through, but we're going to be able to get this crossfire going. The Thunderers over here just unloading on them, and we're going to do some good damage. In the meantime, the cannon's been chipping away at the Witch Hunter. You can see is just not having a good time. The Slayers there destroy the crossbows and are now able to pivot around after these crossbowmen. Unfortunately, we have lost our Organ Gun, but you can see the Sigmar Sons here are getting torn apart. Certainly they're trading well with the Thunderers. They would tear them apart normally, but now we got these Thunderers in position to fire, despite the cannonballs bouncing around them. You can see the Giant Slayers are pushing into the back now, and these Thunderers over here will be able to pivot and start unloading on these halberdiers. You can see the cannonballs are going to start bouncing around. We're trying to aim for Karl Franz, take him down, take the Emperor, take the head off the army. You can see that cannonball just tearing through them. So this can get some value there finally in this game. But at this point, it's just a matter of time for my opponent. You can see the crossbows here running for dear life from the Dragon Pack Slayers. The Witch Hunter has been routed off by the cannon fire. You can see the Rune Lord basically hasn't given a damn this entire game. The Witch Hunter just hasn't been able to do the work, and at this point, it's just going to be game for my opponent. He's down to just the Sigmar Sons here on their last legs, getting torn apart by the Giant Slayers. Carl isn't very survivable. Especially with no magic, which my opponent didn't bring caster here, so a bit of a mistake in my opinion. You can see the cannonballs there pounding into Carl. Over here, the crew getting caught out by the halberdiers, but we are able to hit him with a Master Rune, and at this point my opponent's army is simply going to shatter to army losses, as these very angry Slayers are going to vent their anger on these last two Sigmar Sons who doing the country proud, but in the end, there's only so much you can do against a bunch of raging Sunties. Look at that. These guys are like bigger than Empire State Troops. Like, what kind of dwarves are those? They're like some giant dwarves. Maybe that's why they're called Giant Slayers, because they're giant Slayers. But, for my opponent's build, a few critiques. One, no caster. You always want to bring casters, in my opinion. And two, it was a bit of a hodgepodge build. I want to say it almost looked in some ways like a random comp, but I think it was not. It didn't really... I think the way the units were distributed, it didn't really look to be a random comp, though I could be wrong. But I do think the lack of magic was a big mistake. I also do think the investment in, say, crossbows was not particularly great. I don't really think they were that valuable a unit in this situation. I don't really think halberds are that great of a unit in this situation either. And the Witch Hunter is a very risky pick. I know a lot of people are fond of doing this because against dwarves you can often get away with it. If the dwarf player doesn't bring a Rune Lord, you're gonna have full magic damage. You're gonna be doing almost full damage. You're only down to, you do 75% of your damage. You're very hard to hit for most dwarf shooting. You can kind of run around and just pick off models kind of contemptuous ease, and it can be really tough for the dwarf player to deal with. But honestly, with a Rune Lord and cannons, the Witch Hunter just doesn't work. It's much like Balthazar Gelt with Final Transmutation. Often just isn't going to work against a Rune Lord. That's why I love the Rune Lord in a lot of matchups. That 15% magic resist all by itself is a huge boon, and I think a lot of people underestimate the power it can bring. As far as my build goes, definitely a little light on the front line and the holding force. Not necessarily what I recommend on every map, but on this map where it's very linear and so your opponent is going to be forced to advance straight into the teeth of your guns, I think it can be very effective to just have this much firepower. Slayers, of course, do great work. The Longbeards do okay. Longbeards are not the best unit at slugging it out with other great weapon troops. They're pretty inefficient because they've got somewhat bad stats, but the AP is great against heavy cav. They do have charge defense against large. And they will do damage back to great swords, which can often be difficult if you're using normal longbeards. They're not really going to do very much to great swords in return, especially if your opponent brings some decent buffs for the great swords or debuffs for your longbeards. So that's something to keep in mind. The cannon for my opponent got huge value, which was a little unfortunate for me. He was just able to keep firing away. I wasn't really able to shut it down with my counter battery fire because I kept being pressured. So that was one of the benefits of this very massive or very quantifiable or numerous build, that he was able to get to my backline and really compromise it, or really not compromise it, but just keep it under pressure. But regardless, good game to Captain Von Black over here. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you found it entertaining and fun to watch some Dowie action. If you did, be sure to leave a like, share, subscribe down below. If you have any comments, any criticism, as usual, do not hesitate to ask or post. I'll do my best to respond as soon as I can. I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.